Hello, girls. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good morning for some of you. I believe some students already know me. We have been changing a couple of emails in the past month or so. I'm Natalia. I'm the manager of ICTTF, and I'm also manage the Cyber Risk Academy and the Cybersecurity Bootcamp for Women. Unfortunately, due to the different time zones, we won't have all the students here with us today. The live session will be recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours. Your intake have had more than 500 students enrolled. So I'm really proud to have you all here with us. Paul, will do a presentation for us today, and at the end, we open for a Q&As. If you have any questions, just send on the chat, or if you want to ask directly to Paul, we can also open you can also open your camera, your microphone, and speak directly to him. Thank you so much. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia, and welcome everybody to today's session. And as Natalia says, we have an amazing amount of students on this cohort, and that's great to see. It's great to see so many of you have made it to this live session as well. I've got quite a bit of material that I want to go through with you in the next hour or so, but I'm going to try and contain that to maybe 45, 50 minutes. So if you could hold your questions until the very end, I will have a segment then. So that will give me the floor, so to speak, the virtual floor to go through all of this material without interruption. And then I can answer any questions you may have. And you can send those on the chat. You can send them to support@icttf.org, or indeed just wait until the Q&A session and we can interact at that stage in a much better way. So hopefully you can all hear and see me. I'll just get a thumbs up from Natalia, see if that's all okay.
Yes, Paul, it's all fine, and I can see your screen as well.
Perfect, guys. Thanks a million. And okay, so let's kick on into this material. So my name is Paul Dwyer. I am the president of the ICTTF. I've over 30 years experience working in the world of cybersecurity, working alongside military, law enforcement, indeed global organizations around the world in different sectors, protecting them. The ICTTF is something that I founded over 10 years ago as a not-for-profit initiative. And the idea was that we would create a network, a community of like-minded people, as we acknowledged that all the bad guys were working together. We came to that conclusion that it takes a network to defeat a network, and the ICTTF was born. And since then, we have done many great initiatives, including during COVID, starting the Cyber Risk Academy as a way to share knowledge and to be able to facilitate all of the other great initiatives we do, including things like the Cybersecurity Bootcamp for Women, which is funded, if you like, and supported by the students who pay for courses as well within the platform. So let me kick straight into our material today, guys. I'm going to talk about the cyber risk landscape today. And let me just get some context on this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial sector, but other sectors as well. But I'm going to focus in by way of a case study that will focus in a little bit about the financial sector itself, because it's in the media quite a bit around cyber threats. And the reality is, for all sectors really, that we operate in the real world and the cyber world. And certainly coming through something like COVID as well, society has an increased dependency on that digital ecosystem, if you like, and this has become even more vulnerable to the bad guys. And when we look at the groups of cyber threat actors, we use this infographic because this is a great way of illustrating that overlap of where your adversary is. This isn't all cyber threat actor groups by any means, but it's the main cyber threat actor groups. And what's useful on this infographic is you can see that they've got different motivations. So cyber criminals, they would carry out their activities because they want to make money. You may have nation states that do it for geopolitical reasons and so on. Now, there's quite a bit of debate, and I'm going to talk a little bit about cyber warfare today. There's quite a little bit of a debate, almost pedantic and almost semantics around whether something is crime, whether it's terrorism, whether it's warfare. But the reality is they're all blurred lines in the world of cyber, because you have people with the motivations of cyber criminality and making a profit working alongside those who may be nation states and have geopolitical motivations as well. So let's look at the elephant in the room. I like to start with the elephant in the room on a lot of presentations, and this one will be no exception. And the elephant in the room is all of these different kinds of cyber threats. And what you find is, just like a group of blind people walking into a room and they find an elephant, they all think they're looking at something a little bit different. So if they're at the back of the elephant, they might think they're looking at a rope. If they're the front, they might think it's a snake or a spear, depending on where they're touching that elephant. And cyber threats, in the world of cyber threats, is a bit like that. You may think you're dealing with terrorist-related activities. You may think you're dealing with criminal-related activities. But all these things lead back to what we often refer to as cyber evil, but all refers back to that holistic grouping of cyber threats and that ecosystem where all of these people, all of these bad guys, these bad actors, all work together. They help and support each other in their own nefarious communities on how they operate. So it's a good way, and maybe a good analogy and a way of thinking about that. And that ecosystem now supports an underground economy of over $6 trillion, last estimated. And, you know, it surpassed drug trafficking as the #1 crime in the world because it's highly lucrative. It's very difficult to get caught. And the entry level for criminals to come into that area of work are quite low. And as I say, the risk of getting caught or facing what we call attribution, that is to say, they've been found guilty, they faced court, they faced a sentence, and so on. That's quite low because the complexity of investigating cyber crimes as well, with multiple jurisdictions and so forth. And there's an insatiable demand for, if you like stealing data and then stealing digital assets and compromising digital assets. Because if you think of a marketplace where the fresh fruit gets the highest price, it is exactly the same in the world of these digital underground markets where they sell stolen digital assets, whether that's bank account information. False data refers to information such as billing address, date of birth, and more comprehensive information on an individual asset. And so there is this insatiable demand. This isn't an unsophisticated world of cyber threat actors. This is a very complex and sophisticated world of cyber threat actors, made up of all different kinds of maturity levels, and all different kinds of income levels, and all different kinds of motivations. And that makes it highly complex and a highly sophisticated adversary that we're all dealing with at the end of the day. And from a criminal element, this is a cat and mouse game. I'm often asked, well, will we ever beat the bad guys? Well, bad guys are always one step ahead. They're always innovating. They're always looking for new ways to defeat systems, to break in. And then the natural response is that then things are fixed, or we find a way to detect and to thwart their efforts in what they're trying to do. But it is this cat and mouse game all the time that's going on between bad and good within the world of cyber threat actors. Now, I thought by way of what's going on in the world, it might be useful to share some information on a presentation I did recently that was entitled "On the Internet Everywhere is Ukraine." And the concept being that on the internet, it's flat. There are no jurisdictions, there are no real borders, if you like. And you can be invaded, if you like, from anywhere. And that's how, you know, cyber criminals and cyber bad actors work. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in relation to those blurred lines between what we often refer to as OCG groups, organized criminal groups, or criminal entities, and nation states, and those different kind of motivations and how they work hand in glove in being able to carry out their nefarious activities. So this is, if you like, the real elephant in the room, is what's going on with the war in Ukraine. And I want to talk about the cyber aspects of that and how it's impacting the rest of the world as well. And before I maybe judged to be speaking negatively of Russia, let me say that I have a lot of great Russian friends and a lot of respect for Russians. I obviously don't respect or condone in any way the war that's going on. So I'm going to talk about things in a non-political way, and I will try not to be biased in any way. But the reason I have lots of Russian friends, guys, is they're actually photographs of me, age 20, when I lived in Russia and I left Ireland to live in Kazakhstan and Moscow and set myself up. So that's me. We're here, if you can focus on that. So I have a great affection for Russia, I should say, but I will speak factually about some of the aspects of what's going on from a cyber aspect. And the thing is, guys, it's not just Russia does this, but I'm going to start our little conversation here going back to World War II. And so in 1945, the Girl Guides and the Boy Scouts in Moscow, basically, as a gesture of friendship towards the Americans, gave them this beautiful gift, which was a wooden carved eagle and symbol, obviously, of the United States of America. And this was taken in by the ambassador, who really liked it. But they said, well, why are they giving us this? Let's x-ray it. Let's make sure there's nothing in there that could cause us a problem. And they found that there was nothing in it, but they hung it up on the wall of their meeting room for 7 years. The reality was that there was something carved into the back of this, which facilitated, almost like putting a glass up to a wall and trying to listen to what's going on the other side. It amplified everything to that wall, and so that the KGB were able to point an antenna and a microphone towards that wall and pick up everything that was happening in that room for 7 years. So this isn't something new, guys. This is something going on for quite some time. When we look at the military technical revolution that happened in 1984, we see that the supply chain of the American government was if you like, intercepted. And one of the things they did, which people find quite amusing, is they basically meddled with these typewriters from IBM, and they were able to change that some of the infrastructure within it, so that when the keys were being hit, it emitted a signal, and that signal could be picked up in a building across the road. And effectively, this was a keystroke locker, guys, the first keystroke locker, if you like, that was operating. So this is something that's been going on, and as I say, it's done between nations all the time. But from a Russian perspective, it's quite interesting in the 90s that was happening when, for example, when I arrived in Russia, and Russia was evolving from being that Soviet state into becoming Russia, from becoming the USSR and so on. And there was a lot of what we often refer to as gangster capitalism, and a lot of very clever, if you like, ICT or IT folk became involved in the world of cybercrime because it became very lucrative. And it became this unwritten rule between the Russian government, if you like, and these hackers, these cyber criminals who are operating there, to say, well, look, as long as you don't attack Russians and you're doing this in the rest of the world, we're not going to do anything to you. And they also would have made the case that they were dealing with far more serious issues, like what they would have called Chechen terrorism and so on. And so what it meant effectively was that all of this grew like a petri dish, this capability, this sharing of knowledge, this development of resources within the cyber criminal community within Russia. And it wasn't without its upsides for the Russian government, because they were able to, if you like, leverage favors when they needed them from these criminals, and be able to say, well, I need you to help with the following campaign online, or whatever it happened to be. And it became almost like this mafia-esque relationship between the Russian government and the cyber criminal community. Now, when we talk about cyber warfare, first you get all these sort of semantic debates about, oh, well, even how is it spelt? Is it two words? Is it one word? What is warfare? What is it not? You'll see the challenge in the wording, even within insurance documents, cyber insurance documents, about, are you caught up in a nation state activity, or is it organized criminal community activity, so that you may be covered for criminal activity, but not if it's a nation state. So it brings these complexities into everything that we're dealing with on a daily basis. We often refer to this element of cyber warfare as the fifth domain. So you have theaters of war, if you like, or domains of warfare on land, sea, air, space, and now cyberspace is the fifth domain of this. This comes to life in the real world when you see something like the first summit meeting between Putin and Biden. And they essentially set 22 red lines of areas, because there isn't a Geneva Convention of cyber warfare. It's something I'm an advocate for creating some sort of rules of cyber warfare, because everybody is a valid target when it comes to cyber warfare, and everybody's in the firing lines. But for those who may not be familiar, things like in the rules of Geneva, you would see that there be certain things are off limits, like medical staff and things like that. But it's not that when it comes to warfare. But these guys, when they met, because they're both at it, both nations, I should say, as well as many other nations, are involved in this kind of activity. And they essentially set rules between themselves and said, well, we won't touch this if you don't touch that. And that's probably why today, when we see the war in Ukraine, we're not seeing that massive escalation that many expected around the cyber warfare capabilities, because almost a standoff from that perspective at the moment. And this is the kind of target that they're after: the backbone of society, industrial control systems, SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition systems, the kind of systems that run oil, gas, electricity, water, all of those things. And these systems were designed to be reliable and easy to use and almost foolproof. They were never really designed, with confidentiality in mind. Almost, if you're familiar with the CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, they were the opposite way around: availability, integrity, and finally confidentiality. So almost a reverse priority around the security aspect of those things. And when we see that real world politics taking place, so when we see posturing, and this slide, by the way, guys, is probably about 6-7 years old at least, because it's an example I've been using constantly to explain to people that link between geopolitics and cyber threats. And this is real world case study of the American government saying something which Putin wasn't in favor of, or felt it was diminishing him in some way. And all of a sudden you'd see American high profile companies being hit with massive cyber attacks, such as JP Morgan. And these are shots across the bow. These are shows of power, shows of strength, and they're immediate. So what happens in the real physical world from a geopolitical aspect has an immediate effect in the cyber world and the cyber risk landscape. And there's an absolute intrinsic link between those two things and what's going on. And we see more and more of that as well. And we see lots of warnings now outlining and underpinning that as an issue. So here, for example, is a warning for the National Cybersecurity Centre, but there's also warnings from Irish regulators, from Singaporean, Malaysian, all over the world, warning about the fact that the rest of the world has to deal with the impact of these kind of threats and the impact of the potential collateral damage from cyber warfare activity. So let's deep dive on our cyber threat actor for today, which is Vladimir Putin. So let's have a look at Vladimir Putin. He's powerful, he's resourceful, he's innovative, he's cold, and he's knowledgeable. And those who are familiar with the world of IT and ICT and indeed cybersecurity will know that the world of this is not short of an acronym or two. And this is an acronym we can use to think of this particular cyber threat actor. And let's see where these guys came from, because they use tactics such as information warfare, cyber espionage, and cyber warfare. They're three different things, guys, but these are the kind of tactics that are used from these kind of threat actors. And those, if you want to know a little bit more about this, you can Google things like the big lie theory, where we see here on the right-hand side, we have Goebbels, who is the Minister of Propaganda for the Nazis. And we see these tactics coming up again and again in history, being used by the likes of Donald Trump and so on. And those who make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, from the French philosopher. And this is the reality of what we're dealing with, disinformation and so on. I'll touch upon that a little bit more in a moment. I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to plow on, guys, so we can get to the Q&A session as well. So where did Putin come from? Well, in Russia, rather, we had a number of oligarchs who were essentially very successful business people, and those oligarchs were the kingmakers. They could change anyone's life in a moment, because they had so much wealth and so much power. These are the people who would have owned oil, gas, and so on, and took advantage of that gangster capitalism, if you like, that happened in the 90s and so on there. And these two gentlemen decided that, well, they pretty much had everything, but what were they going to do to replace Yeltsin, who was the president of Russia at the time, famously, and often caught on camera as well, being inebriated. But they felt, well, who now is going to control the politics of Russia? And they wanted to put their man in. But they had to do that and get it condoned with Yeltsin while he was still there in power. So they decided what they'd do is they would hire a spin doctor, like this guy on the right-hand side here. It's called Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort famously was involved in trying to control who came into power in Ukraine through his spin doctor tactics, but he also was the man responsible for Trump's campaign in 2016. And also, you may remember, he subsequently got arrested and then pardoned by Trump. So these kind of people are birds of a feather. They flock together and they operate around the world and what they're trying to do from these aspects. So within that territory, they hired these spin doctors and they said, okay, we need to find out what is the kind of character that Russians would vote for to come in as president. And very quickly, through surveys they ran in newspapers and so on, they came across that there was one obvious choice, and it was this guy, Max Otto von Stierlitz. And this is who they wanted to win. Now, I'm not surprised if you haven't heard of Max Otto von Stierlitz, because he's not real. He's a James Bond kind of character from a KGB TV program in Russia. And so this was almost Russians going, yeah, we want somebody like super cool KGB kind of agent. And we want that person who's strong and smart and being able to go in and take control. And that's what we need now to lead our country. So the spin doctors identified this individual. His name is Vladimir Putin, and he's in the Stasi and working in Dresden in Eastern Germany. And they decided that they would groom him for the role. So they started getting him on board. He was working with the KGB. The KGB, you may recall from history, is the secret police, if you like, within Russia, soon to be rebranded as the FSB, the Federal Security Service. And that Federal Security Service is basically controlled by the Russian government. And they have a unit within there known as the GRU. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because it's to understand that relationship is very important. But in 1999, at the turn of the millennium, this was the first time that Russians really came across this guy called Vladimir Putin, and Yeltsin basically refused to come out at that turn of the millennium at the big party, and decided to send out and chose that was the moment for Vladimir Putin to make himself known. And out came this awkwardly walking, talking guy in an ill-fitting suit that just like a mid-level civil servant, and he started telling people that, you know, this is it, that he is going to lead the country going forward. And that was the handover of power that was carried on, and all of a sudden this unknown entity is leading Russia in that space. And one of the things that he led was GRU, and GRU is the signal intelligence part of the FSB. So signal intelligence, effectively being able to monitor everything that's going on, not just within Russia, but globally. So think of entities like GCHQ, think of the NSA in the United States, those kind of entities. This is the Russian equivalent, and they operate out of this tower in Moscow. They also have subunits, such as the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, and they're also known as the Trolls of Olgino. And this was where they got 800 individuals together, and they trained them how to blog. They trained them how to become trolls, because these are the people that they use. This is the resources in the army they use, the cyber army they use, of these mercenary bloggers and trolls for disinformation campaigns, like the DNC campaign in 2016, the American elections, to sway public opinion and so on. These are the kind of resources they use, and this is how they do it. Now, think back to what I was talking about that elephant, and you all think you're looking at something different, but it's actually all the same thing. So when we look at all of these names, these aliases, and these campaigns that we read about, whether it's Fancy Bear, APT 28, Black Energy, all these cool names they put in these things, Unit 74455, Voodoo Bear, they're all the same thing. They're all GRU. All roads lead back to Russia, lead back to GRU, and these are just different campaigns that can be attributed and related back to the GRU. The GRU is controlled by the FSB. The FSB is controlled by Vladimir Putin. And these are the cyber operations that they have been involved with and have been proven to have been part of. So we have everything from Bad Rabbit, with the World Anti-Doping Agency attacks. We had NotPetya. We have the DNC attacks and the chemical weapons watchdog as well, after the Novichok poisoning as well was part of that. Now, I mentioned one there, which was Petya and NotPetya. So let me explain quickly the differences between those. So Petya was a piece of ransomware. We're all probably familiar with the concept of ransomware. This piece of malware infects your system, kidnaps your data, and requests a ransom. And in theory, if you pay the ransom, they release your data and give you back your data. So it's like a kidnap of digital assets. NotPetya was different. It put itself forward as being ransomware, but actually it was only designed to destroy and to be virulent. And that's the big difference between these two things. And if I use these sort of analogy here of a library and library cards, the first thing NotPetya did was it would destroy all the library cards, if you like. So where the indexes of where the books are. So it destroyed the file allocation tables and the master boot records of the devices that it was attacking. And then it destroyed all the books, if you like. It destroyed all the files. There was no way to get anything back. All it was designed to do was to be a weapon of mass cyber destruction and to destroy everything and to be very, very virulent. So the world had just dodged a bullet, if you like, with WannaCry. And WannaCry was a piece of malware that is attributed to the Lazarus Group from North Korea. And you may recall that when that hit the National Health Service, for example, in the UK, that it was only by really fluke and luck that we found a way to break the kill chain, and a security researcher was able to find a way to stop it being proliferating around the world. And a month after WannaCry, on June 27, 2017, in Ukraine, there's a small company called ME-Doc. And ME-Doc on the second floor, this is actually a picture of their servers up there. And what ME-Doc are the equivalent of like TurboTax, Quicken, Xero, one of these small accounts applications packages. And pretty much every business and every small business in Ukraine uses ME-Doc for doing all their accounts work. And they started getting phone calls on June 27th as well. And people were experiencing all sorts of issues and problems. But it wasn't just ME-Doc. It was pervasive right across Ukraine. And it seemed to be something was happening. Something was happening on the internet, and it was targeting Ukraine. And within 45 seconds, one mid-sized bank was taken down in Ukraine. Within 16 seconds, NotPetya took down the transportation hub within Ukraine. This was something designed just to destroy. Now I'm going to introduce you to Pavlo Bondarenko. Pavlo Bondarenko is actually quite a decent character. He was in his mid-20s. The guy's about 6'8", 6'9". Actually really appears like a wrestler more than a computer geek, if you like. But by 6 o'clock that day, he'd already contacted his boss's boss and said, hey, there's something going on with what's going on the internet in Ukraine. I think it's after the data. I think it's trying to destroy the data. And I think we should switch everything off in the health sector, because he worked in the health sector. They listened to him, and they did. And he said, save the data. There's no way to stop this thing. So they did that, and they managed to save some of the data, but most of the data within the health sector. But by 6 o'clock that day, it had already taken down 4 hospitals, 6 power companies, 4 airports, 22 banks. The entire federal government was on its knees, 300 companies, and 10% of all of the data within a country was destroyed by 6 o'clock that evening. And it moved on. It moved on to Chernobyl. And of course, it didn't care. It was indiscriminate. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Somebody had unleashed this weapon of mass destruction that had no control over it. It even attacked certain entities within Russia itself. And it attacked Chernobyl, and they only had 7 minutes to turn off over 1,000 machines before it would have affected what's in that big arch you see there. And that arch, by the way, it's about the size of the Statue of Liberty. It's about as wide as the Roman Colosseum, and it's got 200 tons of uranium. So God knows what would have happened in planet Earth if those systems weren't switched off and it had affected in a negative way the control of that uranium within that complex. So the world could have faced an even bigger disaster than it did. It also took out some major global victims, and many of those are well known and have documented lots of case studies on this. For example, FedEx, Maersk, and Nuance, and so on. And I'm going to deep dive on one of those for a moment with you, which is Maersk, this big global shipping company, billion-dollar operation. And they had a copy of ME-Doc on one machine, trial version of it on one machine in Odessa, Ukraine. And that was enough that within hours, here where we look at Port Elizabeth and Newark in the United States, what we had, the result of that was this. No truck could enter and no truck could leave because everything is computerized, and it caused miles and miles and miles of tailbacks right across New York. And it effectively stopped and halted and impacted the global distribution chain of the world within hours from it hitting those businesses in Ukraine. This is the global knock-on effect. This is the collateral damage I'm talking about. And this is all Maersk could do. Put up a sign like this on the website saying, hey, we've no idea what's going on, but we're going to find out. So they luckily they've deep pockets and a lot of resources. So they got 600 of their best people and the best consultants and everything around the world to their head office in Maidenhead in the UK. And they started working on getting everything back, and they started making progress. And then they realized really quickly that their plan, the resiliency plan, cyber resiliency plan around the domain controllers was basically flawed, because their plan was that all of the domain controllers were synchronized. Now, a domain controller is the machine, if you like, the device within your network that holds the mapping of who has access to what and where on your entire network system. And without that, basically, you've no architecture, you've no wiring diagram, if you like, of how things are operating between themselves. And their plan was that, well, if one went down, we've 249 more domain controllers, and they're all synchronized all around the world and all doing the same job. But if one dies, two dies, we still have all the others. But that's actually a flawed plan, because they never ever thought of the concept that they'd lose all of them at once. And with NotPetya, they lost all of them at once, all of them bar one, because in Ghana, in Africa, there's a small office there, and they had suffered a power outage. Because of that power outage, again, due to luck, that domain controller had not been affected with NotPetya because it was offline. So they said, this is great. We have a copy of our domain controller. We'll just synchronize it back up now. But the internet connection was so poor, they couldn't do that. It's okay. We'll get the guys in Ghana to come up to Maidenhead with the drive. But none of them had work permits. So they had to create this almost global relay race through Africa, where somebody left Ghana with the hard drive, met someone in Nigeria, in Lagos, or Abuja, and then went from Abuja up to London and got down to Maidenhead, and they all swapped over this drive, and eventually they got the drive and they were able to start bringing back the network systems. But guys, that was just blind luck that there was a power cut in Ghana. And still, some weeks later, a couple of months later, in Davos, the CEO of Maersk was there, this massive global shipping group, as I say, and he said, well, it only cost us $350 million. That's a very conservative figure, and I think everybody knows that. And they said they were now going to make cybersecurity a competitive advantage. Now, the reality is that getting hit with NotPetya, they had lots of out-of-date systems such as Windows 2000 within their network infrastructure. And even though they had spent and budgeted for cybersecurity, they hadn't linked it into the KPIs, the key performance indicators, or the performance bonuses for individuals and staff. So it was in nobody's interest, selfish interest, if you like, to make sure security was improving, because their employment bonuses didn't count on or didn't factor in. So they were focusing on other areas. And even though the budget was there and things were there to do, and they weren't motivated in the right way to make sure that this was becoming part of their culture and part of the policy of the organization. So this lesson can be learned there for everybody. This is Tom. Tom is in the Department of Homeland Security, and they estimated that the global impact of this piece of malware that was released by a bad actor was over 10 billion on the cost. Now, there was a much more human factor to that as well, because lots of the health sector was knocked out. So that meant that operations were postponed. People had to redo medical tests and so on. So it's incalculable, that kind of impact that this piece of malware had on the world. And remember that little company back in Ukraine? Well, their door was kicked in later and by the police, because what had happened was they traced back patient zero, the source of where this NotPetya was coming from. And it was coming from those servers on the second floor, because the bad actor had worked out that the best way to compromise that network of computers right across Ukraine is to go to one of the most popular pieces of software that's used by Ukrainian businesses, which was the ME-Doc software. And they had circumvented and compromised the update system for that software. And that's how they spread their virus, their malware, to do the damage that it did on a global basis. Now, the world reacted to this, and it was acknowledged that this was the GRU unit that I spoke of. And lots of these governments around the world, the UK, the United States, and so on, started putting out, indictments to arrest these people. But these people, are they soldiers? Because if we look at something like the People's Liberation Army in China, Unit 61398, they're in full military uniform when they're hacking away and trying to hack into businesses across Europe and the United States. But these are more like mercenaries, a lot of them. These are more like organized cyber criminals who treat this as a job, and they are highly paid, highly motivated, and they do their favors, like I say, for those who harbor them and host them and protect them, which is Vladimir Putin in the case of the Russians. And when we look at these campaigns impacting the French elections, the Olympics, turning off the power in Ukraine in the middle of winter, all the Novichok poisoning investigations, all these campaigns can all be traced back to the GRU unit. And if I bring it right back to home in Ireland, during COVID, our health sector was completely knocked out by a piece of ransomware, and that has had massive impact, and some estimate maybe 100 million euros, but they're just conservative estimates around the cost and the quantifiable risk from that point of view. But when you look at the qualitative risk, the damage to the HSE, the health sector piece itself, Ireland, even on a world stage, we seem to be taken down by something like that. And it was attributed to a group called the Conti ransomware group. Now, during the Ukraine war and what's going on there, some Ukrainian hackers were able to effectively get access to some of the WhatsApp messages between some of these Conti ransomware group guys. And that ransomware group, by the way, is made up of 62 people. It's run like they've got a C-level structure. They have, they are a corporation, and they turn 180 million a year. What a business! 62 people, 180 million a year. And these guys, this Conti ransomware group, what was leaked from that information was that link back to the Russian government. And one of the things that's even more obvious beyond that was that the day that the Russians invaded Ukraine, on the Conti ransomware group's website, they have a section where they put up the name of their latest victim. So, for example, when the HSE in Ireland was attacked, they said, "Oh, HSE is attacked, and we want X million from them in order to release their data." And it's a kind of name and shame piece. It's their big real estate piece on their website where they put in their biggest news and the biggest everything. And they put up there, "Vladimir Putin, you have our full support for anything you want done." And this is, again, more anecdotal if we needed evidence of this link between what's going on between this most dangerous ransomware group in the world and the Russian government. So what we're dealing with, guys, effectively, when we look at these things, people try and pigeonhole it, say, is it cyber terrorism, is it cyber crime? But really, it's about all of these bad actors working together. And that's why it's so important for an organization like the ICTTF to be able to educate and inform and give people the right kind of tools, if you like, the knowledge, because knowledge is power, and be able to deal with these kind of things, whether it's bad actors preying on children, whether it's individuals, whether they're preying on our parents or small businesses, whatever it happens to be. This is what they're after. So let's look at our most effective weapon now, guys. I'm going to change gear a little bit and just watching our timing so we still have time for a question and answer session. And people always say, well, isn't it just the responsible of IT security? Isn't it just responsible of our CISO? Well, no, it's everybody's responsibility. And when I'm talking to people now about developing national strategies and so on, we talk about a techno-socio view. So in other words, it's all of a society's responsibility to deal with cyber threats. How can we, as citizens and so on, just point the finger at a bank and say, oh, the bank should keep us secure, or the government should keep us secure, if we're not patching our phones, if we're not patching our laptops or devices, if we're not taking cyber hygiene seriously? But as we all take cyber hygiene seriously and up our game, then it makes it much more difficult for these threat actors to be successful. And I use this image of an unattended bag in an airport because I think we all got the message to with terrorism and so on, that when you see something like that, then it's everyone's responsibility maybe to raise the alarm or do something about it. And there's lessons for all of us from the likes of safety in aviation, where safety is everybody's responsibility, from the baggage handler to the pilot, to the air host or hostess, and so on. They all have a responsibility to raise a hand and say, hey, this is wrong. I'm going to do something to make this safer. And we all have to be like that when it comes to cybersecurity. And that's why in these converging worlds, the physical world, the cyber world, it's so important to have what we call business protection officers. That's to say, maybe people who are augmenting their skills. They might work in procurement, might work in anti-money laundering, they might work in compliance, they might work in some other aspect of the business. But cyber is pervasive and it's ephemeral throughout the entire organization. So there's a need and an ability for everybody to help up the game. It is not just, as I often say, the tail wagging the dog. It's not just IT security. That's just one part of it. It's about business decisions being made from governance and oversight, project management, marketing, procurement, all of those aspects of the business as well. And there's a skills crisis in the world of cybersecurity. And that's why we see chief information security officers being paid over $1 million a year, because there's over 6 million cybersecurity jobs not filled at the moment, and there is the skills crisis. So businesses and organizations can't simply just rely on outsourcing this to consultancies and firms. They need to get the people that are in their own organizations that care and maybe love their businesses that they work for to protect them. And those answers lie within the organization, and we need it from the top down. This is a leadership challenge as well. So we believe that the answer lies within the organization, and that the best way forward is to actually empower your own people and to train them, and it's best for society as well. And that's why we develop courses like, for example, the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course. Just walk you through really, really quickly some of those 8 modules to give you a flavor and an idea of the different aspects, that it's not just IT security. So for example, we start off, we talk about understanding the cyber risk landscape, the different threat actors, how they operate, how they hack, all that kind of stuff. Then we move on to understanding, how do you develop a cyber strategy for an organization? If you've got a business strategy, you know the business is doing today and what it's trying to do and what its ambitions are. How do you develop the most appropriate kind of strategy so you can get buy-in from leadership, you can get the budgets, you can get that cohesive culture to deal with cyber risks within the organization? Then we look at what we often refer to as meaningful metrics. That is to say, the numbers that will make sense to the business. A fancy term of this is CRQ, cyber risk quantification. But what we're talking about here is, can we tie in KPIs and KRIs, key risk indicators, around parts of the business where the business will understand? So you're dealing with the challenge where what happens in a lot of organizations is somebody walks in with the results of a vulnerability scan report or pen test, and they say to the business leaders, hey guys, we have 50,000 known vulnerabilities on the network. And the business person turns around and goes, so what? What do you want me to do? Right. Whereas if you're going in and saying, hey, you know this new banking app we're about to roll out? Well, it's at risk because of the following cyber threats. And here's our risk management options. We accept, we can mitigate by doing this, we can transfer the risk, and so on and so forth. That's using cyber risk management techniques. We also have a module around cyber leadership and culture, creating effective leadership, governance, and oversight, and affecting the culture within the organizations through policies and so on. And then there's a complex module around cyber risk and the law, so such a growing area around compliance and standards and so on from a global perspective. And then we dive into things like cyber resilience and incident management. How do you handle an incident when it occurs? How do you do triage? How do you work through that whole communications piece? And we walk through all of that as well. And then we look at other areas such as dealing with third parties, risk around the supply chain, and indeed even remote workers, and how all of that is affected and how you can best manage that. And finally, we put it all together and we show you how to develop a strategy based on all your learnings so you can apply this potentially to your own organization. Now, I say all of this, guys, so you can just get a flavor and a taste that the world of cybersecurity, you might be interested maybe in the law aspect, or you might be a numbers person and you want to analyze the numbers around cyber risk quantification. There's all of these different parts, and something like this Certified Cyber Risk Officer course offers you a way to gain skills and experience in all of those areas, so that you might want to then go and further specialize in a particular area. So what we're doing to help you guys, and in a way to commend you for successfully completing the cybersecurity bootcamp for women, is we want to help you become a cyber leader. And to do that, we are going to provide you with and offer you with a limited number of these vouchers for each of the courses that we run on this. But Natalia has put together a package, and there's also some extended grants, I think, for some Irish businesses as well. For those of you who may be from Ireland, I think there can be some further grants available. But effectively, after this, you can avail of the opportunity to get a voucher for €1,000 off the course, if that's something you want to pursue. But you can reach out to Natalia to talk about that. So let me start winding this, guys, down into the Q&A session. I'm going to invite Natalia to come back on to the call and see, do we have any questions or some conversation pieces? Because I believe we've got probably about 10 minutes left or so.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much. I don't have any questions at the moment. I just want to let everyone knows I will follow up with the details about the voucher, how to use it. It's for the CCRO course starting on June 20th. This is something we have been doing with the Cybersecurity Bootcamp students. As I mentioned in the beginning, and a couple of students joined us after that, we had over 500 girls enrolled for the May intake. So congratulations. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And if anyone has a question and would you like to turn on the camera and ask directly to Paul, would be brilliant. I just have one question coming in here. Thank you, Alice. What, in your opinion, has been the biggest cybersecurity attack in history, Paul?
Um, okay, so the biggest attack in history, the most devastating in many ways people have talked to about is the NotPetya one because of that impact it had around the world, and it's an ongoing impact. But there's been other huge significant attacks which were game changers. Things like Stuxnet. So Stuxnet was a joint operation between the American government and the Israelis, where they developed a piece of software, if you like, that was put out in the wild, and it would essentially cause no harm until it was in a specific environment. And that specific environment is it was looking for certain industrial control systems that were manufactured by Siemens, and the only place that existed, or was meant to be the only place that existed, was in Natanz, in an air-gapped facility, many meters under the ground, because it's the uranium enrichment facility, and they wanted to knock back their projects for developing uranium and weapons grade. So they developed this piece of malware, if you like, that was able to affect the centrifuges and be able to. So this was becoming kinetic from a cyber ability to make things essentially break. So there's been many significant attacks and milestones along the way. I think, we've seen massive scale DDoS attacks, for example, that have been taking down communication links and the likes of massive sites like Twitter and so on, that were leveraging the Internet of Things. That's to say, all these little devices that we all have at home, we put on our Wi-Fi and have very little security on them, and they are all part of botnets now, and those that are compromised, and they can all be used by these bad actors to attack whatever they want. And these scale of attacks were going up like 50x, 100x bigger than the previous attacks before, and they're massive scale of attacks. So we're seeing what we often refer to as black swan events. So a black swan event is something that we think will never happen. We'll never see a black swan, and then it becomes something quite normal. So it's moving all of the time. The target level is moving all of the time. And it's only because of that standoff situation, I think, we're not seeing more massive scale impact of some of these attacks from a nation state to nation state capability. But a lot of it goes on, guys. You just don't hear about it in the media. But companies like our own, we deal with these, and we help organizations respond and recover to them as well.
Thank you, Paul. I'm getting loads of questions in terms of career, what is next. As I mentioned, I will follow up with an email with some recommendations to join the community, to join the group on LinkedIn, connected to other people in the industry. What else? The blog in the ICTTF, it's a good way to start taking a look. I will follow up. If you guys have any questions and don't want to wait for me to send the email, you can reach me out at natalia@icttf.org. I will just ask you one more question, Paul, before we leave.
Sure.
What are your thoughts in terms of cyber insurance? We know this is a question that comes up pretty often, so it'd be nice having some insights on this.
Yeah, maybe I should just write a blog on this, because this question just keeps going up and coming up. So cyber insurance, it's a good question, guys. Okay, so insurance is something, forget about cyber insurance, just insurance. Insurance is something that you take out in the event of something that might happen. And it's usually to cover something that is completely devastating. So fire insurance, okay? And the concept is good for something like that. It should not be taken out as something for people to think, well, that's just part of how we do that part of our business. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses often think, well, we will just take out this cover, and then anytime we have cyber instance, we just contact the insurance company and we try and use that for business as usual. So there's many complex issues around that. The cyber insurance industry itself is trying to figure itself out. And by that, I mean, they were burnt, if you like, through ransomware, because as soon as the bad actors, the criminal groups, worked out that, hey, if we attack companies that are insured, all the insurance companies just pay out the ransoms. So what happened? All the ransoms keep going up, and insurance companies pay out more. And now insurance companies are saying, hey, we're not going to give cover for this, we're not going to give cover for that, or you have to prove how secure you are, you have to have done a good cyber assessment and be able to provide assurance and confidence to us that you have controls in place, or we'll not be able to insure you. So it's quite dynamic. Now, in most cases, there's little choice but to have cyber insurance of some sort of cover. But what I would say to people is cyber insurance is a very valuable thing to have if you have the right kind of policy. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, the reality, what I see, or some people just take, I saw a bank recently in another country who just wanted cover for €1 million. And €1 million sounds like a lot, but it's not for a bank. But they just wanted to be able to, from a compliance perspective, say, we have cyber insurance. Now, that's the wrong way. That's not an effective policy for them. So I think insurance is a fantastic risk management option, because it's a risk management option from the point of view of transferring risk, but it shouldn't be used as a way of operating your business, and relying on it as a way to just deal with stuff on a more regular basis. The reality of incidents are, you're going to get lots of incidents, and you need to be able to prevent them. You need to be able to detect when they happen. You need to be able to respond. You need to be able to recover. And I would say the last thing you want to be able to do is that those instances are so large or out of control that you need your insurance. So insurance is always a last option. It's a last option of you've exhausted all your capabilities, and it's now time for the insurance company to take over. So they shouldn't be seen as the firefighters. They shouldn't be seen, as the arson investigators from a cyber perspective, if you get my analogy. It's case by case basis. It's a very valuable thing to have in place, but make sure you have the right kind of cover. And I alluded to one particular complexity around this as well, which is not just from an insurance point of view, but even from a response point of view, that when certain incidents happen, it's not clear whether they're criminal or whether they're acts of warfare. And often you'll find within cyber insurance policies that acts of warfare are not covered. So if a nation state comes out and says, well, we did the following, and by the way, your business was caught as collateral damage, you may not be covered. So these are all the things where I mean it's dynamic and it's changing and it's evolving, and you need to really have a good conversation with a good broker and understand what your requirements are, understand what you're really getting covered for. And especially in relation to the fines that are coming out from new legislation coming from Europe, specifically for those of you maybe more focused on the European market. The EU cyber strategy is bringing out a number of new pieces. For example, I think it was on May the 13th, the latest pieces went through NIS2, which is the Network Information Systems Directive, the Critical Entities Resilience Act, and DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And if you look at something like DORA's fines are 1% of your global turnover per day until you're compliant, and your mandatory response is same day. Game changer kind of stuff, and it's for the financial sector primarily, right through the supply chain. Now there will be massive insurance requirements around that, because what falls within the remit of that and being regulated is even ICT companies. So it's an evolving area, and something that should be studied carefully before opting for the appropriate policy. Hopefully that helps answer that question. I would take a final one if there is one, Natalia, or I'm happy to call it a day there, whatever you guys like.
Thank you, Paul. The other one I have here is how to make or to work with the teams to be more to pay more attention to phishing, ransomwares, how to make sure that the team's members are taking cybersecurity seriously.
Okay, so it's a great question to maybe finish on as well. So we actually have a module on this around leadership and culture, because the culture within an organization is driven by policy and having the right kinds of appropriate policies for your organization. And that's an art in itself, creating that, because everybody needs to understand, like that unattended bag in the airport, it's in everybody's interest to deal with that potential risk. And getting everybody focused and not seeing this as an IT problem. This is a business issue. Cyber risk is a business issue. The CEO is responsible and the board are accountable, not the head of IT security or the CISO. Functionally, they may have that as a job role, but the buck stops at the board level. That's who's responsible from a legal perspective, the directors of the company, everything else, and to many different degrees and variances, depending on jurisdiction and what sector you're in, and the size and complexity of your business. But to get everybody on the same page, people need to understand what the issue is and how they can all make a difference. And that's through effective training as well. And I don't mean the compliance training of just, hey, don't click on links and do this, but it's more that it's about how to integrate it into your business, how to get everybody to understand what they can do. So if you people from procurement, people from legal, people from compliance, people from IT, all those around a table, all getting trained in the same kind of curriculum or the same kind of information, it helps everybody raise their game together, just like in a broader society view you can do within a country. And that's why something like, for example, the CICERO training and CICERO's training and so on that the ICTTF provide has been so impactful right across organizations, because it affords and provides the flexibility of that organization to get everybody empowered to deal with cyber threats and cyber risks on a daily basis with how they're working within their organizations. And it keeps them interested and it keeps them focused and knows to make a difference beyond what they're doing in the job. If they're doing a good job on cyber security and cyber risk management, then they're preventing people who traffic human beings. They're preventing people who torture animals online for money. They're preventing people who sell children online, who create snuff movies, who do terrible, horrible things, and they're all part of that cyber world. If you're defending your business against someone stealing email addresses and passwords, then you're stopping that evil. And when people understand that, then they understand and they appreciate that they can make a difference themselves. And I think that's a big catalyst for change to get people. So look, I'll finish up there, guys. Happy if you further on questions, follow on, send them into support@icttf.org, and we'll do our best to come back to you guys on them as well. I would like to thank you all for your participation and making the Cybersecurity Bootcamp for Women so successful, and it's growing from strength to strength. Of course, with a major thanks to Natalia, who's the inspiration and power to make all of this happen as well. I will thank you all, and hopefully we will be part of your journey as well into the world of cybersecurity, and help develop and support your career as we go on. So guys, I hope you have a great day, and thank you so much. Thank you, Natalia, for your help today. Cheers.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to talk to you girls to follow up with the next steps. Thank you. Bye-bye.